The pre-dawn darkness cloaked the world in a heavy shroud as I rolled out of bed, my body responding to an internal alarm honed by years of battling nature's fury. I'm Tanner Reeves, a veteran smoke jumper with a decade of experience under my belt, and this morning promised another dance with the flames that threatened to consume the wilderness I'd sworn to protect. My gear lay ready, a silent sentinel awaiting the call to action. The ritual of suiting up was as familiar as breathing: flame-resistant Nomex clothing, sturdy boots that had carried me through countless infernos, and the reassuring weight of my personal fire shelter, a last resort I hoped never to use. Each piece was a layer of protection against the unpredictable wrath of wildfire. Outside, the air carried the sharp bite of an early autumn chill, a stark contrast to the blistering heat we were about to face. The base hummed with activity, floodlights cutting through the darkness as engines roared to life. My fellow jumpers moved with purpose, their faces set with determination and a hint of the adrenaline that fueled us all. Our team leader, Maria Cortez, a seasoned veteran with nerves of steel, called us in for the briefing. Her voice, steady and clear, laid out the situation with precision. Lightning strikes in the remote reaches of Northern California's Klamath National Forest had ignited a blaze that was quickly growing beyond control. With high winds forecast and the terrain too rugged for conventional ground crews, we were the forest's first and perhaps only line of defense. As we boarded the plane, I found myself seated next to Dan Hawkins, my jump partner for the past 3 years. Dan's usual pre-jump banter was subdued, replaced by a focused intensity that mirrored my own. The gravity of our mission hung heavy in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of smoke that had already begun to permeate the cabin. The flight to the drop zone was a blur of last-minute equipment checks and mental preparation. Through the plane's windows, the pre-dawn landscape gave way to an apocalyptic scene. The fire below us painted the world in shades of orange and red, a stark reminder of the challenge that awaited us. At 6:10 a.m., the jump light flashed green. With a final nod to Dan, I stepped into the void. The rush of freefall was exhilarating, a moment of pure freedom before the jerk of the parachute deployment snapped me back to reality. As I guided my descent, the heat from the fire below rose to meet me, a preview of the inferno we were about to enter. Landing in a small clearing, I quickly gathered my chute and equipment. Dan touched down moments later and we immediately set to work. The roar of the fire was deafening, a primal sound that spoke to the raw power of nature unleashed. We moved swiftly, our training kicking in as we began to establish our first fire line. The work was grueling. We swung our Pulaskis, combination axe and adze tools that were essential for creating fire breaks, with relentless determination. Each swing cleared brush and dug into the earth, creating a barrier that we hoped would halt the fire's advance. The heat was oppressive, sweat pouring down our faces and backs, mixing with ash and dirt to create a grimy second skin. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the smoke-filled air, we pushed ourselves to the limit. Our team worked in perfect synchronization, a well-oiled machine forged in the crucible of countless fires. We knew the stakes, not just the forest at risk, but the homes and lives that lay beyond, counting on us to hold the line. It was mid-morning when Dan caught my attention, gesturing urgently towards a nearby ridge. At first, I thought he had spotted a spot fire, a dangerous development that could quickly outflank our defenses. But as I followed his gaze, I saw something that defied explanation. There, silhouetted against the smoky sky, was a figure unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with a bulk that suggested immense strength. But it wasn't the size that struck me most. It was the way it moved, a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. For a moment I wondered if the heat and exhaustion had gotten to me, causing me to hallucinate. But Dan's wide-eyed stare confirmed that he was seeing it too. We watched, transfixed, as the creature surveyed the burning landscape before disappearing back into the thick forest. "What the hell was that?" Dan's voice was barely audible over the roar of the fire, a mixture of awe and fear in his tone. I shook my head, unable to form words. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what we had just witnessed. A bear? No, its proportions were all wrong. Some unknown species of primate in Northern California? It seemed impossible. Before we could discuss it further, the radio crackled to life. Maria's voice cut through our daze, ordering an immediate pullback. The fire had jumped our line to the north, and we needed to regroup and establish a new defensive position. As we retreated, I couldn't shake the image of the creature from my mind. It had seemed so out of place, yet at the same time perfectly at home in the chaos of the burning forest. I wanted to radio in what we had seen, but something held me back. In the middle of a critical operation, reporting a sighting of what sounded like a creature out of myth or legend seemed not just foolish, but potentially dangerous to our credibility and the mission at hand. The rest of the day passed in a blur of smoke, flame, and back-breaking work. We managed to contain the northern flank of the fire, but at a cost. 2 of our team suffered minor burns, and we all pushed ourselves to the brink of exhaustion. As night fell, we finally received word that additional ground crews and air support would arrive by morning. We had done our job, holding the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. In the makeshift camp that night, the mood was one of weary triumph, tinged with an undercurrent of unease. Dan and I exchanged glances over the flickering light of the campfire, an unspoken agreement passing between us. We would keep what we had seen to ourselves, at least for now. The next few days were a non-stop battle against the blaze. The arrival of additional resources turned the tide, and slowly but surely, we began to gain the upper hand. Throughout it all, I kept a watchful eye on the ridgelines and deep shadows of the forest, hoping for another glimpse of the mysterious creature. But if it was still out there, it remained hidden from view. As the fire finally came under control and our team prepared to pull out, I found myself lingering, reluctant to leave the forest and the mystery it held. Dan approached me as I was packing up my gear, his face etched with the same mixture of exhaustion and wonder that I felt. "We're not crazy, right?" he asked quietly. "We really saw something out there." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, we did. But what do we do with that information?" It was a question that would haunt me in the weeks and months to come. As we returned to our normal lives and routines, the memory of that moment on the ridge remained vivid in my mind. I found myself researching cryptozoology, delving into reports of similar sightings in the Pacific Northwest. The more I read, the more I became convinced that what we had seen was something truly extraordinary. But with that conviction came a dilemma. As smoke jumpers, our credibility was everything. Our judgment could mean the difference between life and death, not just for ourselves, but for the communities we protected. Going public with a story about encountering a mysterious ape-like creature in the midst of a raging forest fire seemed like a surefire way to destroy that credibility. And yet the weight of the secret was a burden I found increasingly difficult to bear. I began to have vivid dreams of the creature, sometimes seeing it watching me from the edge of a burning forest, other times encountering it in the mundane settings of my everyday life. The dreams left me with a lingering sense of something unfinished, a truth that demanded to be acknowledged. 3 months after the fire, I made a decision. I couldn't go public with what I had seen, but I couldn't remain entirely silent either. Using an anonymous online forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena, I shared my story. I was careful to omit any details that could identify me or the specific location, focusing instead on the creature itself and the circumstances of our encounter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some dismissed my account as a hoax or the product of an overactive imagination. Others latched onto it as proof of their own beliefs in the existence of undiscovered species. A few even suggested that the creature might be some kind of forest spirit or guardian, drawn out by the threat of the fire. Reading through the comments, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. relief at finally sharing my experience, even if anonymously, but frustration at the knowledge that I could never fully explain or prove what I had seen. As the months turned into years, I continued my career as a smoke jumper. Each fire season, I returned to the forests of the Pacific Northwest with a newfound sense of wonder and respect for the mysteries they might hold. I never saw the creature again, but I remained watchful, always aware that behind the veil of smoke and flame there might be eyes watching back. The experience changed me in profound ways. I became more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the forest, more aware of the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. My fellow smoke jumpers noticed the change, commenting on my increased focus and almost preternatural ability to anticipate the fire's movements. Dan and I remained close, bound by our shared secret. We never spoke of it openly, but there was an understanding between us, a shared acknowledgement that we had glimpsed something beyond the ordinary. It made us better smoke jumpers, more respectful of the wilderness we sought to protect, and more aware of our own limitations in the face of nature's mysteries. 5 years after our encounter, I received a call from Dan. His voice was tight with excitement as he told me about a news report he had just seen. A group of hikers in Northern California had captured grainy footage of a large bipedal creature moving through a dense forest. The location was less than 50 miles from where we had fought that fateful fire. As I watched the footage, my heart raced. The creature's movements, its size and shape, were hauntingly familiar. While the video was far from conclusive proof, it was enough to reignite the sense of wonder and possibility that had first gripped me on that smoke-filled ridge. That night I sat down at my computer and began to write. Not another anonymous post, but a full account of what Dan and I had seen and how it had affected us. I didn't know if I would ever share it publicly, but I felt compelled to record every detail while it was still fresh in my memory. As I wrote, I realized that the true impact of our encounter wasn't in the possibility of proving the existence of an unknown creature. It was in the reminder that the world is vaster, more complex, and more mysterious than we often allow ourselves to believe. In the heart of a raging inferno, we had glimpsed a truth that both humbled and exalted us, that there are still wonders to be discovered, mysteries to be explored, and that sometimes the line between myth and reality is as thin as a veil of smoke. The forests we fight to protect are more than just trees and wildlife. They are keepers of secrets, holders of ancient mysteries that we may never fully understand, and that, perhaps, is their greatest value. In a world that often feels fully mapped and explained, they offer us the gift of the unknown, the possibility of magic and wonder that lurks just beyond the reach of our understanding. As smoke jumpers, we are guardians not just of the forests, but of these mysteries. We stand at the interface between the known and the unknown, between the world of humans and the untamed wilderness. Our encounters with fire are also encounters with the primal forces that shape our world. And sometimes, if we're very lucky or very cursed, with entities that defy our understanding. I don't know if I'll ever see the creature again. I don't know if anyone will ever capture definitive proof of its existence. But I do know that my experience has forever changed the way I view the forests I've dedicated my life to protecting. Every time I jump into a fire, every time I stand on the edge of a burning wilderness, I'm aware that I'm not just fighting to save trees and wildlife. I'm fighting to preserve the possibility of wonder, the chance for future generations to experience the awe and mystery that I felt on that smoke-shrouded ridge. To those who read this account in doubt, I say, keep an open mind. The world is larger and stranger than we can imagine. And to those who believe, I say, tread carefully. The mysteries of the forest are not ours to solve, but to respect and protect. As for me, I'll continue to jump into the heart of infernos, to stand as a guardian between civilization and wilderness. But now, with every jump, with every step into a burning forest, I carry with me the knowledge that in the shadows cast by the flames, in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, there may be eyes watching back. Eyes that hold secrets as old as the forests themselves. Secrets that will continue to call to those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. The fire may be our primary foe, but it is also our teacher, revealing truths about the world and ourselves that we might otherwise never discover. In the years since my encounter with the unknown creature, I've come to see each fire as not just a battle against destruction, but as an opportunity for revelation. This new perspective has changed the way I approach my work. I find myself more attuned to the subtle signs of the forest, more aware of the intricate web of life that exists beyond our everyday perception. It's made me a better smoke jumper, more intuitive in predicting fire behavior, more respectful of the forces we're up against. But it's also left me with a restlessness, a constant awareness that there's more to the world than what we can see or touch. On quiet nights, when the fire season is over and the world is blanketed in winter's chill, I often find myself staring out into the darkness, wondering what other secrets the wilderness holds. I've become something of an amateur researcher, spending my off-seasons delving into folklore, cryptozoology, and the history of unexplained phenomena in the areas where I work. I've connected with others who have had similar experiences, not just smoke jumpers, but forest rangers, hikers, and local residents who have glimpsed something they can't explain in the depths of the woods. These stories, shared in hushed tones over campfires or through anonymous online forums, paint a picture of a world far stranger and more wonderful than most people realize. They speak of creatures that defy classification, of lights that dance through the trees with impossible intelligence, of spaces in the deep forest where time and reality seem to bend. But with this growing awareness comes a heavy responsibility. As smoke jumpers, we're often the first and sometimes only humans to access remote areas of wilderness. We're witnesses to a world that few others ever see, guardians not just of the forest but of its secrets. I've had to make peace with the knowledge that I may never have concrete proof of what I saw that day. The creature, whether it was an unknown species, a forest spirit, or something beyond our current understanding, remains elusive. But its impact on my life is undeniable and ongoing. There have been moments in the years since where I've caught fleeting glimpses of something just at the edge of my vision, a shadow moving with impossible speed through a burning forest, eyes reflecting the glow of embers in a way that no known animals would. But always, these sightings are too brief, too uncertain to be sure. My encounter has also affected my relationships with my fellow smoke jumpers. While most remain unaware of what Dan and I saw, there's a subtle divide between those of us who have experienced the unexplainable and those who haven't. It's not a matter of superiority, but rather a shared understanding, a mutual recognition of having glimpsed behind the veil of ordinary reality. I've become a mentor of sorts to younger smoke jumpers, not just in the technical aspects of our job, but in cultivating a deeper, more spiritual connection to the wilderness we protect. I teach them to listen to the forest, to respect its mysteries, and to always be prepared for the unexpected. Some think I've gone a bit eccentric in my older years, spinning tales of forest spirits and unknown creatures. But those who've been out there in the deep wilderness, who've faced the raw power of nature at its most extreme, they listen. They understand that in those moments when we're surrounded by fire and smoke, balanced on the knife edge between life and death, the impossible becomes possible. As I near the end of my career as a smoke jumper, I find myself contemplating my legacy. Not in terms of fires fought or acres saved, but in the wisdom I can pass on to the next generation. I want them to approach the forest not just as a resource to be protected, but as a living entity full of wonders and mysteries. I've started writing a memoir, not for publication, but as a record of my experiences and insights. It's a document I hope will find its way into the hands of those who need it most, those who have seen something they can't explain and fear they're losing their grip on reality. In it, I recount not just my encounter with the unknown creature, but all the small moments of wonder and mystery I've experienced in my years of jumping into burning forests. The way the smoke sometimes moves against the wind, the unexplainable sounds heard in the depths of the night, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and aware. As I write, I'm struck by how much my life has been shaped by that one moment of encountering the unexplainable. It's given me a purpose beyond just fighting fires, a quest to understand and protect the deeper mysteries of the natural world. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps one day irrefutable evidence of unknown creatures or phenomena will emerge from the wilderness. Or perhaps these mysteries will continue to elude our attempts to categorize and understand them. But I do know this. As long as there are wild places left in the world, there will be mysteries. As long as there are those willing to venture into the heart of an inferno, to stand at the boundary between the known and the unknown, there will be stories like mine. To those who come after me, to the future guardians of the forest and its secrets, I say this: keep your minds open and your eyes sharp. Respect the wilderness not just for what you can see, but for what remains hidden. And remember, when you're deep in the smoke and flame, when the world has been reduced to heat and shadow, that you may not be as alone as you think. The forest is watching. It has secrets to share, for those brave or fortunate enough to witness them. And in those moments of revelation, in the face of the inexplicable, you may find a truth far greater than yourself. As for me, even as I prepare to hang up my jumpsuit for the last time, I know that my journey is far from over. The call of the unknown, first heard on that smoke-shrouded ridge so many years ago, still echoes in my heart. And while I may no longer jump into fires, I'll never stop exploring the mysteries of the wilderness. For in the end, it's not just about the creature I saw or the unexplained phenomena I've witnessed over the years. It's about maintaining our sense of wonder in a world that too often seems devoid of mystery. It's about remembering that beyond the edges of our maps, beyond the reach of our technology, there are still frontiers to be explored, secrets to be uncovered. And so, as I write these final words, I find myself filled not with regret for the normal life I might have led, but with gratitude for the extraordinary journey I've been on. A journey that began in fire and smoke and led me to the very edges of the known world. To those who read this and doubt, I say, may you one day experience the humbling awe of encountering something beyond your understanding. And to those who believe, who have perhaps had their own brushes with the unknown, I say, you are not alone. Keep watching the shadows, keep listening to the whispers of the wind. For in those liminal spaces, in the fog-shrouded valleys and the smoke-filled canyons, the true wonders of our world are waiting to be discovered. The fire may be our adversary, but it is also our guide, illuminating the extraordinary that lurks just beyond the ordinary. And in its light, for those with the courage to look, the impossible becomes possible, and the unknown becomes a gateway to a larger, more wondrous world. In the small town of Evergreen Valley, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a languid pace, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as snow in summer. At least that's what I thought growing up. My name is Daniel Cooper, and this is the story of how my ordinary life in Evergreen Valley took a turn into the extraordinary and terrifying. It's a tale of friendship, loss, and the dark underbelly of a town that seemed too perfect on the surface. I was born and raised in Evergreen Valley, the only child of Mary and John Cooper. My father worked as a forest ranger, while my mother taught at the local elementary school. Our house, a cozy two-story colonial, sat at the edge of town, bordering the vast expanse of whispering woods. From as early as I can remember, the forest was my playground. While other kids spent their summers at the community pool or the baseball diamond, I was scaling trees, building forts, and pretending to be an explorer in uncharted wilderness. It was during one of these solo adventures at the age of 8 that I met the person who would become my best friend and ultimately change the course of my life forever. I was attempting to cross Miller's Creek on a fallen log when I lost my balance. Just as I was about to plunge into the icy water, a hand grabbed my arm, steadying me. I looked up to see a boy about my age with unruly red hair and a face full of freckles grinning at me. "Whoa there, buddy, that was a close one," he said, helping me regain my footing. "Thanks," I mumbled, embarrassed at nearly falling in front of a stranger. "I'm Chris Hartley," he said, extending his hand. "You live around here?" I shook his hand, introducing myself. "Yeah, just on the edge of town. You're not from Evergreen Valley, are you? I haven't seen you at school." Chris's grin widened. "Nope, just moved here last week. My dad got a job at some research place in the woods. Pretty boring stuff, if you ask me. So I figured I'd do some exploring instead of helping unpack." From that moment on, Chris and I were inseparable. We spent the rest of that summer exploring every inch of Whispering Woods we could reach. Chris was fearless, always pushing us to venture further, climb higher, and stay out later. He brought an excitement to my life that I hadn't realized was missing. When school started in the fall, Chris and I found ourselves in the same class. We quickly became known as a package deal. Where one of us went, the other was sure to follow. Our teachers often had to separate us to keep us from chatting during lessons. As we grew older, our bond only strengthened. We shared similar interests in music, movies, and books. We both loved science fiction and spent countless hours discussing our favorite stories and coming up with our own fantastical tales. But it wasn't just our shared interests that cemented our friendship. Chris had a way of pushing me out of my comfort zone, encouraging me to take risks and stand up for myself. In return, I helped ground him when his impulsiveness threatened to get him into trouble. One memory that stands out vividly occurred when we were 13. There was a group of older boys who had been bullying some of the younger kids at school. Chris and I had managed to avoid their attention, but one day, we saw them picking on a small, quiet boy named Ethan. Before I could stop him, Chris marched right up to the biggest of the bullies. "Hey!" he shouted, his face red with anger. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size?" The bully, a hulking 8th grader named Brock, turned to Chris with a sneer. "Like you, shrimp?" I watched in horror as Brock shoved Chris hard, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Without thinking, I rushed forward, placing myself between Chris and Brock. "Leave him alone," I said, my voice shaking but determined. Brock looked surprised for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Look at this! The dynamic duo thinks they're tough guys now." He raised his fist and I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, I heard a stern voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" I opened my eyes to see Mr. Thompson, the school principal, standing there with his arms crossed. Brock and his cronies quickly dispersed, mumbling excuses. As Mr. Thompson helped Chris to his feet and checked if we were okay, I felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. It was the first time I had ever stood up to anyone like that, and even though I was terrified, it felt good. Later that day, as Chris and I walked home, he nudged me with his elbow. "Thanks for having my back there, Danny. That was pretty brave." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Well, I couldn't let you have all the fun, could I?" Chris laughed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "You know what? We make a pretty good team." From that day forward, our friendship took on a new dimension. We weren't just two kids who liked hanging out together anymore. We were a team, watching each other's backs and facing the world side by side. As we entered high school, Chris and I remained as close as ever, but our interests began to diverge slightly. I developed a passion for photography, spending hours capturing the beauty of Whispering Woods through my camera lens. Chris, on the other hand, became increasingly fascinated by technology and engineering. Despite these differences, we always made time for each other. Our weekend adventures in the woods continued, now with the added excitement of me documenting our explorations through photographs and Chris bringing along various gadgets he had tinkered with. It was during one of these outings in the spring of our junior year that the course of our lives would change forever. We had no way of knowing that the discovery we were about to make would unravel the fabric of our quiet town and test the limits of our friendship. As we ventured deeper into Whispering Woods than we ever had before, neither of us could have imagined the shadows that lurked beyond the trees, waiting to draw us into a mystery that would consume our lives and leave an indelible mark on Evergreen Valley. The day that changed everything started like any other Saturday in late April. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of early spring, but the sun shone brightly, promising warmer days ahead. Chris and I had planned to explore a section of Whispering Woods we had never ventured into before. I arrived at Chris's house just after dawn, my backpack loaded with snacks, water, and my trusty camera. Chris answered the door, his red hair sticking up in all directions, clearly having just rolled out of bed. "Morning, sunshine," I teased. "Ready for our big adventure?" Chris yawned dramatically. "Give me 5 minutes to grab my stuff and chug some coffee." As we set out, the morning dew still clinging to the grass, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of anticipation. It was more than our usual excitement for exploration. Something in the air felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. We followed our usual path into the woods, but instead of turning east towards Miller's Creek as we normally did, we continued north. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker, making our progress slow and deliberate. After a couple of hours of hiking, we came across an old, overgrown trail that didn't appear on any of our maps. Chris's eyes lit up with that familiar spark of curiosity. "What do you say we check it out?" he asked, already stepping onto the hidden path. I hesitated for a moment. The trail seemed to lead deeper into a part of the forest that looked darker, more primeval somehow. But Chris was already forging ahead, and I didn't want to be left behind. As we followed the overgrown path, the forest around us changed subtly. The trees seemed older, their trunks wider and gnarled with age. The canopy above grew so thick that only slivers of sunlight penetrated, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. "Danny, check this out," Chris called from up ahead. I jogged to catch up with him and saw what had caught his attention. Half hidden by vines and moss was a weathered wooden sign. Chris brushed away some of the growth, revealing faded letters. "Evergreen Research Facility," Chris read aloud, his voice tinged with excitement. "Property of..." The rest is too faded to make out. "Evergreen Research Facility?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the day. "I've never heard of anything like that around here." Chris was already pulling out his phone, fingers flying over the screen as he searched for information. "Nothing comes up online," he muttered, frowning. "This is weird, Danny. Your dad's a forest ranger. Has he ever mentioned anything like this?" I shook my head. "Never. But you know how it is with Dad. He doesn't talk much about his work." A mischievous grin spread across Chris's face. "Well, there's only one way to find out what this place is." Before I could protest, he was pushing through the underbrush beyond the sign. With a sigh, I followed, my camera at the ready to document whatever we might find. After another 15 minutes of struggling through dense vegetation, the forest suddenly opened up into a large clearing. In the center stood a complex of dilapidated buildings, their concrete walls stained and crumbling, partially reclaimed by nature. "Holy crap," Chris whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. I raised my camera, snapping photo after photo of the abandoned facility. The main building was 3 stories tall, with broken windows gaping like empty eye sockets. Smaller structures surrounded it, including what looked like a garage and several storage sheds. As we approached the main building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I turned, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Chris, maybe we should head back," I suggested, my voice quavering slightly. "Report this to my dad or something." But Chris was already at the main entrance examining the heavy metal door. "It's not locked," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "Come on, Danny. Where's your sense of adventure?" Before I could answer, he had pushed the door open with a loud creak and disappeared inside. Cursing under my breath, I followed him, the darkness of the building swallowing me whole. The interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, most filled with rusted equipment and scattered papers. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. I used the flash on my camera to light our way, the bright bursts illuminating scenes of abandonment and neglect. "What do you think they were researching here?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty hallways. Chris shrugged, rifling through a stack of moldy documents on a desk. "Hard to say. Most of this stuff is too damaged to read. But look at some of this equipment. It looks advanced. Way more high-tech than you'd expect for an old abandoned place like this." As we delved deeper into the facility, the sense of unease grew stronger. In one room we found rows of large cylindrical tanks, their glass clouded and cracked. Another contained cages of various sizes, some with peculiar scratch marks along the bars. "Danny!" Chris called from across the room. "You need to see this!" I made my way over to where he stood in front of a large metal cabinet. The doors hung open, revealing rows of labeled glass vials. Most were empty or broken, but a few still contained small amounts of luminescent liquids in various colors. "What is this stuff?" I wondered aloud, raising my camera to take a photo. Just as I pressed the shutter button, a loud crash echoed through the building, causing both of us to jump. The sound seemed to come from somewhere below us. Chris's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement. "There must be a basement level. Come on, let's check it out." "Are you crazy?" I hissed. That could be anything. The floor caving in, an animal, or worse. But Chris was already moving towards the hallway. "Or it could be answers," he called back. "Don't you want to know what this place really is?" Reluctantly, I followed him. We found a stairwell leading down, the steps slick with some kind of dark, damp substance. The further we descended, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. The basement level was a single, cavernous room filled with massive machinery. Most of it was dark and silent, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. But in the center of the room stood a device unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a towering construct of metal and glass, with a central column that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Tubes and wires sprawled out from it like the tentacles of some mechanical octopus, connecting to various consoles around the room. Chris approached it, his hand outstretched as if in a trance. "It's warm," he murmured, as his fingers touched the metal surface. Suddenly, the machine hummed to life. Lights flickered across its surface, and the central column began to glow brighter. A computerized voice crackled through hidden speakers. "Warning, unauthorized activation detected. Initiating containment protocol." Before either of us could react, a blinding flash of light erupted from the machine. I felt a wave of energy wash over me, knocking me off my feet. As my vision cleared, I looked around frantically for Chris. He was gone. Where Chris had been standing moments before, there was now only empty space. The machine pulsed once more, then fell silent, the lights fading back to their previous dim glow. "Chris!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast empty room. "Chris, where are you?" But there was no answer. My best friend had vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the bowels of a mysterious facility that, by all rights, shouldn't even exist. As the reality of the situation sank in, panic overwhelmed me. I scrambled up the stairs, out of the building, and into the fading daylight. My lungs burned as I ran through the forest, branches whipping at my face, until I finally burst out onto the familiar streets of Evergreen Valley. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, bursting through the doors and collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. As concerned officers gathered around me, I tried to explain what had happened between ragged breaths. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how insane it all sounded. An abandoned research facility hidden in the woods, strange machines and glowing liquids, and worst of all, my best friend vanishing into thin air. The skeptical looks on the officers' faces told me everything I needed to know. They didn't believe me, and why should they? It sounded like the plot of a bad science fiction movie, not something that could happen in quiet, normal Evergreen Valley. As I sat in the police station, repeating my story to increasingly doubtful authorities, whatever had happened in that facility, whatever had taken Chris, it was far from over. The mystery of Whispering Woods and the Evergreen Research Facility had only just begun, and I was now irrevocably entangled in its dark and dangerous web. The days following Chris's disappearance passed in a blur of police interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. The authorities treated it as a missing person case, but their efforts were focused on the areas of Whispering Woods that we normally frequented, not the uncharted territory where the research facility stood. I tried multiple times to lead search parties to the facility, but each attempt ended in failure. It was as if the path we had taken that fateful day had vanished, swallowed up by the dense forest. The more I insisted on the existence of the abandoned buildings, the more doubtful and concerned the adults around me became. My parents were beside themselves with worry, both for Chris and for my mental state. I overheard them discussing the possibility of trauma-induced delusions, and the word therapy was mentioned more than once. Chris's parents, the Hartleys, were devastated. Mrs. Hartley spent most of her time either crying or staring blankly at the wall, while Mr. Hartley threw himself into organizing search efforts with a frantic energy that bordered on mania. I couldn't bring myself to look them in the eye, feeling a crushing guilt for not having stopped Chris from entering that accursed building. As the days turned into weeks, the initial frenzy of the search began to die down. The police, having found no trace of Chris or the mysterious facility I described, started to treat the case as a potential runaway situation. This theory gained traction when it was discovered that some of Chris's clothes and his emergency cash stash were missing from his room. But I knew the truth. Chris hadn't run away. He had vanished before my very eyes, taken by something beyond our understanding. The problem was, I had no way to prove it. It was during this time that I noticed strange things starting to happen around town. At first, they were small, easily dismissed occurrences, lights flickering more often than usual, electronics behaving erratically, an unusually high number of pets going missing from their yards. Then, the nightmares began. Every night, I found myself back in that basement, watching Chris disappear over and over again. But in my dreams, I could hear him screaming, calling out for help from some impossibly distant place. I would wake up in a cold sweat, his cries echoing in my ears. As the summer wore on, my obsession with finding the truth grew. I spent every free moment combing through old town records, researching the history of Whispering Woods, and trying to find any mention of the Evergreen Research Facility. My room became a chaos of maps, printouts, and hastily scribbled notes. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I made my first real breakthrough. Buried in the archives of the local library, I found a newspaper clipping from 1962. The headline read, "Government approves new research facility in Whispering Woods." The article was vague about the nature of the research, citing only advancements in energy and physics as the facility's purpose. But it was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that the facility had existed. Armed with this new information, I went to the police station, hoping they would reopen the case. Officer Brennan, a kindly middle-aged man who had always been patient with me, listened as I excitedly explained my discovery. "Daniel," he said gently when I finished, "I understand you're still hurting from Chris's disappearance. We all are. But this article, it's from over 60 years ago. Even if this facility did exist back then, it doesn't prove anything about what happened to Chris." I left the station feeling defeated but more determined than ever. If the authorities wouldn't help me, I'd have to find the truth on my own. It was around this time that I noticed someone new in town, a woman in her early 30s, with short dark hair and intense green eyes. I first saw her at the local diner, sitting alone in a booth, scribbling furiously in a notebook. What caught my attention was the way she kept glancing around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching her. Over the next few days, I saw her several more times around town, always alone, always watchful. My curiosity piqued. I decided to follow her one afternoon as she left the diner. She led me to the edge of town, right up to the border of Whispering Woods. There, she met with a man I recognized as Dr. Harris, the high school physics teacher. They spoke in hushed tones, their body language tense and urgent. As I crept closer to try and overhear their conversation, I accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sharp crack seemed to echo through the trees. Both the woman and Dr. Harris whipped around, their eyes scanning the area. I ducked behind a large oak tree, my heart pounding. When I peeked out again, they were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. That night, as I lay in bed trying to make sense of what I'd seen, a soft tapping sound came from my window. Cautiously, I approached, pulling back the curtain to find a folded piece of paper stuck to the outside of the glass. With trembling hands, I opened the window and retrieved the note. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, were 5 words that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to talk. Dr. Harris." As I stared at the note, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through me. Finally, someone was reaching out, someone who might have answers. But why the secrecy? And how was Dr. Harris involved in all of this? Little did I know this mysterious message would be the key to unlocking a conspiracy far larger and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and I was standing at the threshold of a truth that would change everything. The next day at school, I could barely focus on my classes. My eyes kept darting to the clock, counting down the minutes until my scheduled physics class with Dr. Harris. As I entered the classroom, our eyes met briefly, and I saw him give an almost imperceptible nod. After class, as the other students filed out, Dr. Harris called out, "Daniel, could you stay back for a moment? I'd like to discuss your last assignment." Heart pounding, I approached his desk. Once we were alone, Dr. Harris's demeanor changed completely. The friendly, slightly absent-minded teacher was replaced by a man with a grave expression and eyes that darted nervously to the door. "Daniel," he said in a low voice, "what you saw yesterday, you must understand the danger you're in. The woman I was meeting, her name is Agent Lydia Chen. She's with let's call it a specialized branch of the government." I opened my mouth to ask a question, but Dr. Harris held up a hand to stop me. "No, let me finish. We don't have much time. The facility you found, the one where Chris disappeared, it wasn't abandoned. It was dormant. And now, because of what happened with Chris, it's active again." My mind reeled with this information. But what is it? What were they doing there? And what happened to Chris? Dr. Harris sighed heavily. "The full truth is complicated and dangerous. But I'll tell you what I can. The Evergreen Research Facility was built to study and experiment with interdimensional travel." He must have seen the skepticism on my face because he quickly added, "I know how it sounds, Daniel, but after what you saw happen to Chris, can you really discount the possibility?" I thought back to that moment in the basement, the flash of light, Chris vanishing into thin air. Slowly, I nodded. The experiments they were conducting, they were groundbreaking but incredibly dangerous. There were incidents, people disappearing, strange phenomena occurring in town. Eventually, the government shut it down, or so we thought. "We?" I interrupted. Dr. Harris gave a sad smile. "Yes, we. I was a young researcher there, fresh out of college. When they shut us down, most of us were reassigned or sworn to secrecy. I chose to stay in Evergreen Valley, to keep an eye on things, make sure it stayed dormant. But now it's active again," I said, the implications slowly sinking in. "Because of us. Because of me and Chris." Dr. Harris nodded gravely. And that's not the worst of it. Whatever took Chris, we think it might have been trying to come through to our side. A chill ran down my spine as I processed this information. So what do we do now? For now, you need to be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even your parents. There are people in this town who are not what they seem. Dr. Harris scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. This is a secure email address. If you notice anything strange, anything at all, contact me immediately. As I left the classroom, my head spinning with this new information, I felt like I had stepped into a different world. The familiar hallways of Evergreen Valley High suddenly seemed alien and threatening. Every face I passed could be hiding secrets. Every shadow could be concealing something unnatural. That night, as I lay in bed trying to process everything Dr. Harris had told me, a soft blue light began to emanate from my closet. Cautiously, I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened the closet door, I found the source of the light, my old walkie-talkie, the one Chris and I used to use during our childhood adventures, was glowing and emitting a low, pulsing hum. With trembling hands, I picked it up. Through the static, I heard a voice, Chris's voice, faint and distorted but unmistakable. "Danny, help! Not alone here!" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me standing in the dark, clutching the now silent walkie-talkie. In that moment, I knew that no matter the risk, no matter the danger, I had to find a way to bring Chris back. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality, push the boundaries of science and the supernatural, and force me to confront the darkest secrets of Evergreen Valley. As I stood there in the dark, the echo of Chris's plea ringing in my ears, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth about the Evergreen Research Facility. I would find out what really happened to Chris, and I would bring him home, no matter the cost. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley had become the center of a cosmic mystery. The days following Dr. Harris's revelation and Chris's mysterious transmission were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every casual conversation felt like it could be a carefully orchestrated interrogation. The weight of the secret I now carried pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. At school, I found myself scrutinizing my classmates and teachers, wondering who might be involved in the conspiracy. Was the cafeteria lady's lingering gaze a sign of suspicion, or was I just being paranoid? Did Mr. Johnson, the janitor, always linger near the science wing, or was he keeping an eye on Dr. Harris? I started noticing other things too. Small details that I might have overlooked before now seemed significant. The way certain streetlights in town would flicker in a specific pattern. The increasing number of weather balloons that seemed to hover over whispering woods. The subtle changes in people's behavior, a nervous tick here, an out-of-character comment there. One afternoon, about a week after my conversation with Dr. Harris, I was walking home from school when I noticed something odd. A van was parked across the street from my house, its windows tinted so dark they were almost black. As I approached, the van started up and slowly drove away. Heart pounding, I rushed inside and up to my room. I pulled out my laptop and composed a quick email to Dr. Harris, describing what I'd seen. His reply came within minutes. "Stay calm. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion. Meet me at the old water tower at midnight. Come alone and make sure you're not followed." The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. I made a show of going to bed early, telling my parents I had a headache. Then at 11:30 I quietly slipped out of my window and into the night. The old water tower stood at the edge of town, a rusted relic from a time before Evergreen Valley had a modern water system. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in its shadow. For a moment, fear gripped me. What if this was a trap? But then the figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing Dr. Harris's familiar face. "Good, you made it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time. They're watching us more closely now." "Who's watching us?" I asked. "The same people who ran the facility. They never really left Evergreen Valley, just went underground. Now that the facility is active again, they're mobilizing. Dr. Harris reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, about the size of a cell phone. This is a prototype we were working on before the shutdown. It's designed to detect interdimensional energy fluctuations. I've modified it to home in on the specific frequency we recorded when Chris disappeared. He handed me the device. It was heavier than it looked, with a small screen displaying a series of incomprehensible numbers and a pulsing dot. That dot represents the strongest source of interdimensional energy, Dr. Harris explained. Right now it's pointing towards the facility in Whispering Woods, but it's been moving. Moving? I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Dr. Harris nodded grimly. Whatever came through when Chris disappeared, it's not staying put. It's exploring, learning, and I fear it may be looking for a way to bring more of its kind through. As if on cue, the device in my hand began to beep softly. The pulsing dot on the screen was moving, heading towards the edge of the screen. "It's on the move again," Dr. Harris said, his voice tight with tension. "We need to track it. Try to understand what it's doing. But Daniel, you must promise me something. Do not, under any circumstances, try to confront this thing on your own. It's dangerous beyond your imagination." I nodded, my mouth dry with fear and excitement. "What about Chris? Is there any way we can use this to find him?" Dr. Harris's expression softened slightly. "I'm working on it. The energy signature from the transmission you received. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. It's as if Chris is trapped between dimensions, able to reach out but not fully cross over. But every time he makes contact, it leaves a trace. If we can collect enough of these traces, we might be able to triangulate his location in whatever space he's in." As we stood there in the shadow of the water tower, the gravity of the situation fully hit me. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The fate of our entire town, maybe even our world, could be at stake. "What do we do now?" I asked. "For now, we watch and wait," Dr. Harris replied. "Use the device to track the entity's movements, record any unusual occurrences in town, and most importantly, trust no one. The people behind the facility, they have eyes and ears everywhere." As I made my way home that night, the device hidden safely in my backpack, I felt as if I had crossed a point of no return. The quiet, normal life I had known was gone, replaced by a world of shadows, secrets, and cosmic horrors. Little did I know, the true tests of my resolve and sanity were yet to come. The entity from the facility was just the beginning. Something far darker and more terrifying was stirring in the heart of Evergreen Valley. Something that would push me to the very limits of what I thought was possible, and beyond. As I climbed back through my bedroom window, the first light of dawn was just beginning to creep over the horizon. A new day was dawning in Evergreen Valley, but for me, it felt like the sun might never truly shine again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. The device Dr. Harris had given me became my constant companion, its soft beeping a reminder of the invisible threat lurking in our town. I started keeping a journal, meticulously recording every strange occurrence I noticed. Lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost like code. Animals behaving erratically, as if fleeing from an unseen predator. And most disturbing of all, people in town starting to act different. It was subtle at first. Mrs. Abernathy, the sweet old lady who ran the local bakery, snapping at customers in a way that was completely out of character. The usually boisterous high school quarterback, suddenly quiet and withdrawn. My own parents, having hushed conversations that would abruptly stop whenever I entered the room. But the most unsettling changes were happening to me. I started having vivid, terrifying dreams. In them, I would find myself wandering through twisted, impossible landscapes, alien geometries that hurt my eyes to look at, and always, in the distance, I could hear Chris calling for help. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. And sometimes in those moments between sleep and waking, I could swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my room, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at them directly. One night, about 3 weeks after my midnight meeting with Dr. Harris, I was jolted awake by the sound of static coming from my closet. Heart racing, I approached, already knowing what I would find. The old walkie-talkie was active again, glowing with that eerie blue light. I grabbed it with trembling hands, straining to hear through the crackling static. "Danny, it's getting stronger. Can't hold on much longer." Chris's voice was weaker this time, barely audible through the static. "They're changing people. Be careful, don't trust." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me clutching the silent walkie-talkie in the dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of Chris's fragmented warning. Who was changing people, and who couldn't I trust? I reached for the device Dr. Harris had given me, which I now kept on my nightstand. The pulsing dot on the screen was moving rapidly, heading towards the center of town. Without thinking, I threw on some clothes and sneaked out of the house. The streets were eerily quiet as I followed the signal. The dot led me to the town square, where I ducked behind a bush, peering out at the empty space. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw it. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. But it was a cool night. The shimmer coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, translucent and shifting. I held my breath, watching in horror and fascination as the entity moved across the square. It paused by the statue of the town's founder, reaching out with a limb that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Where it touched the statue, the metal began to corrode and twist, taking on impossible shapes. Suddenly, the entity's form flickered, and for a split second I saw something else. A mass of writhing tentacles, eyes that shouldn't exist, a mouth full of teeth that defied geometry. I bit back a scream, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. The entity's head snapped in my direction, and I knew with certainty that it had sensed me. Without thinking, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, door locked, huddled under my blankets like a child afraid of the dark. As the adrenaline wore off, I realized two things. First, I now had concrete proof that something otherworldly was loose in Evergreen Valley. And second, I was in way over my head. The next morning, I emailed Dr. Harris, describing what I'd seen. His reply was terse. "Meet me at the old quarry after school. Don't tell anyone." The day crawled by, each minute feeling like an hour. When the final bell rang, I practically ran out of the school, my mind focused on the upcoming meeting. The old quarry was on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and overgrown. As I approached the meeting spot, I saw not just Dr. Harris, but the woman I'd seen him with before, Agent Chen. "Daniel," Dr. Harris said, his face grave, "what you saw last night, it confirms our worst fears. The entity isn't just exploring, it's changing our reality, little by little." Agent Chen stepped forward. "We've been monitoring similar incidents across town. The entity seems to be preparing the environment. For what, we're not sure, but it can't be good." "What about the people acting strange?" I asked. Chris said something about them being changed. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen exchanged a look. "We think the entity is capable of influencing people," Dr. Harris said carefully. "Possibly even possessing them to some degree." "Then how do we know who to trust?" I demanded, fear and frustration bubbling up inside me. "That's the problem," Agent Chen said softly. "We don't." As the implications of this sank in, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, both literally and figuratively. The world as I knew it was unraveling, and I was caught in the middle of it all. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The entity's presence was like a stone dropped in a pond, and the ripples were about to become waves that would threaten to drown us all. As we stood there in the quarry discussing plans and theories, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to grow longer, The wind whispered secrets just beyond my understanding, and somewhere in a place between dimensions, I knew Chris was still calling for help. The sun began to set, casting an eerie red glow over the quarry. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, Daniel," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of knowledge, "in this new reality we're facing, nothing is as it seems. Trust your instincts, question everything, and above all, be careful." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. As I made my way home in the gathering darkness, I realized that my quest to find Chris had become something much bigger, much more dangerous. I was now a player in a cosmic game, with the fate of Evergreen Valley, and perhaps the world, hanging in the balance. The lights of my house came into view, and for a moment, I hesitated. How could I face my parents, knowing what I knew? How could I pretend that everything was normal when reality itself was under attack? But I had no choice. I had to keep going, had to find a way to stop this entity and save Chris. As I walked up the driveway, I steeled myself for whatever challenges lay ahead. As autumn descended upon Evergreen Valley, bringing with it a chill in the air and leaves of gold and crimson, the sense of wrongness in the town grew stronger. The entity's influence was spreading, subtle but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at shadows and scrutinizing every interaction for signs of otherworldly influence. The device Dr. Harris had given me beeped more frequently now, the pulsing dot on its screen moving in increasingly erratic patterns. One crisp October morning, I woke to find a thin layer of frost on my bedroom window. But as I looked closer, I realized the frost wasn't forming random patterns. Instead, it seemed to be arranging itself into complex, fractal-like shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I quickly snapped a photo with my phone and sent it to Dr. Harris. His response came within minutes. "It's accelerating. Meet at the library after school. Bring the device." The day crawled by, each class feeling like an eternity. I couldn't focus on the lessons, my mind constantly drifting to the frost patterns and what they might mean. When the final bell rang, I practically ran to the library. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were waiting for me in a secluded corner of the reference section. Their faces were grim, and I could see the toll that recent events had taken on them. Dark circles underlined their eyes, and Dr. Harris's normally neat appearance was disheveled. "Show us the device," Agent Chen said without preamble. I pulled it out of my backpack and handed it over. She studied the readouts, her frown deepening. "The energy signatures are off the charts," she muttered. "It's like the barrier between dimensions is getting thinner." Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. "We've been picking up similar readings all over town. The entity isn't just influencing our reality anymore. It's merging it with its own." A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean for us? For the town? "If we can't stop it," Dr. Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Evergreen Valley might cease to exist as we know it. It could become a pocket of alien reality, a beachhead for whatever lies on the other side to enter our world." The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The entire town, maybe even the world, was at stake. "But that's not all," Agent Chen added, her eyes meeting mine. "We've been monitoring the frequencies of the transmissions you've been receiving from Chris. They're changing, becoming more coherent." My heart leapt. "Does that mean we're closer to finding him?" Dr. Harris and Agent Chen exchanged a look. "Possibly," Dr. Harris said cautiously. "But it could also mean that wherever Chris is, it's being affected by the thinning of the dimensional barriers too. He might be able to reach out more easily, but so might other things," I finished, a new fear gripping me. Agent Chen nodded. "We need to act fast. We think we've pinpointed the epicenter of the dimensional disturbances. It's..." She was cut off by a sudden, high-pitched whine from the device. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I saw a series of symbols I didn't recognize flash across it. It's happening, Dr. Harris breathed, his face pale. The veil between dimensions, it's starting to tear. As if on cue, the lights in the library flickered. Books began to fall from shelves, their pages flipping wildly as if caught in an unfelt wind. And then, I heard it. A voice, not from the device, but seemingly from the air around us. "Danny, they're coming through. You have to stop them." It was Chris's voice, clearer than I'd ever heard it since his disappearance. But there was an edge of panic to it that made my blood run cold. Before any of us could react, a deafening crack split the air. A shimmer appeared in the center of the library, like heat haze, but more solid. It widened, forming a tear in the very fabric of reality. Through that tear, I caught a glimpse of a world that should not be. Impossible geometries, colors that had no name, and entities that defied description. And they were looking back at us. "Run!" Agent Chen yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the exit. As we fled the library, I could hear inhuman sounds behind us, a cacophony of screeches and growls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We burst out onto the street, only to find that the situation outside was no better. The sky had taken on a sickly, swirling quality, and more tears were appearing all over town. People were running, screaming as things beyond comprehension began to slip through into our world. "We need to get to the facility," Dr. Harris panted as we ran. "It's the source of all this. If we can shut it down, we might be able to close the tears." As we raced through the chaos-engulfed streets of Evergreen Valley, I realized that we had reached the point of no return. The battle for our reality had begun, and I was right in the middle of it. With Chris's warning echoing in my mind and the fate of everything I knew hanging in the balance, I steeled myself for what was to come. Whatever horrors awaited us at the Evergreen Research Facility, I knew I had to face them. For Chris, for my town, and for the very fabric of reality itself. As we raced through the chaotic streets of Evergreen Valley, the world around us seemed to be unraveling. The sky roiled with unnatural colors, and rifts in the fabric of reality appeared and disappeared in dizzying succession. The air was thick with an otherworldly static that made my skin crawl. Dr. Harris led the way, his face a mask of grim determination. Agent Chen brought up the rear, constantly scanning our surroundings for threats. I was sandwiched between them, clutching the beeping device that was our only guide in this madness. "We're getting close!" Dr. Harris shouted over the cacophony of screams and inhuman noises that filled the air. The facility should be just beyond Whispering Woods. As we approached the tree line, I noticed something unsettling. The trees were changing. Their bark writhed as if alive, branches twisting into impossible shapes. Some seemed to be fusing together, forming grotesque arches and tunnels. "Don't touch anything," Agent Chen warned as we entered the warped forest. "Who knows what effect it could have on you?" We pushed on, the device in my hands beeping more frantically with each step. The forest around us grew darker, the twisted trees blocking out what little light remained in the sky. Strange bioluminescent fungi pulsed in the shadows, casting an eerie glow over our path. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek pierced the air. We froze, watching in horror as a creature that defied description emerged from behind a gnarled tree. It was like a twisted amalgamation of insect and reptile, with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Before we could react, Agent Chen had her weapon out, a sleek silver gun unlike anything I'd ever seen. She fired, and a bolt of blue energy struck the creature, causing it to dissolve into a puddle of iridescent goo. "Interdimensional nullifier," she explained briefly. "Won't work on everything, but it should buy us some time." We pressed on, encountering more bizarre and terrifying entities as we got closer to the facility. Each encounter left me more shaken, my mind struggling to process the impossible things I was witnessing. Finally, we broke through the tree line into a familiar clearing. The Evergreen Research Facility stood before us, but it was barely recognizable. The once abandoned buildings were now alive with pulsating energy, their structures warped and twisted into mind-bending configurations. At the center of it all was the main building, now a towering monstrosity that seemed to stretch impossibly high into the swirling sky. A pillar of crackling energy shot up from its peak, puncturing the very fabric of reality. "My God," Dr. Harris breathed. "It's worse than I thought. The facility isn't just a conduit anymore. It's become a beacon, calling out to other dimensions." "How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Before Dr. Harris could answer, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Not from the device this time, but from the air around us. "Danny, Dr. Harris, you have to hurry." It was Chris's voice, clearer than ever. "The core. You have to shut down the core. It's in the basement where I disappeared. But be careful. They don't want you to stop it. They're using it to break through completely." "Chris," I shouted, "where are you? How can we get you back?" I'm everywhere and nowhere," his voice replied, tinged with fear and confusion. "This place, it's not like our world. Time and space don't work the same way, but I think if you shut down the core, it might pull me back. But Danny, whatever happens, you have to stop this. The fate of our world depends on it." His voice faded, leaving us in the eerie glow of the transformed facility. Dr. Harris turned to us, his face set with resolve. "You heard him. We need to get to the basement and shut down the core. It won't be easy. Whoever or whatever is behind this will fight us every step of the way." Agent Chen checked her weapon. "I'll take point. Daniel, stay between us. And remember, trust nothing you see in there. This close to the source, reality itself will be fluid." As we approached the entrance to the facility, the air grew thick with tension. I could feel the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on me. This wasn't just about saving Chris anymore. The fate of our entire world hung in the balance. As we entered the facility, reality seemed to warp around us. Corridors stretched and twisted, defying the laws of physics. Shadows moved of their own accord, and whispers in unknown languages echoed through the halls. We fought our way through waves of interdimensional horrors, Agent Chen's weapon proving invaluable. Dr. Harris guided us with his knowledge of the facility's layout, though even he seemed disoriented by the nightmarish transformations. Finally, we reached the basement. The massive machine that had taken Chris now dominated the entire space, pulsing with eldritch energy. "There!" Dr. Harris shouted over the deafening hum. "The control panel!" As we approached, a figure materialized before us. It was Chris, but not as I remembered him. His form flickered and shifted as if he wasn't fully in our reality. "Danny," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You made it." "Chris!" I moved towards him, but Agent Chen held me back. "Wait," she warned. "Something's not right." Chris's face twisted into an inhuman grin. Smart woman, but too late. Suddenly, Chris's form exploded into a mass of writhing tentacles and eyes. The entity that had been masquerading as my friend lunged at us. Agent Chen fired her weapon, but the creature shrugged off the blast. Dr. Harris was knocked aside, leaving me face to face with the horror. In that moment, I heard Chris's true voice in my head. "Danny, the device! Use the device!" Acting on instinct, I pulled out the energy detecting device and held it towards the creature. It emitted a high-pitched whine, and the entity recoiled in pain. "The frequency!" Dr. Harris yelled, struggling to his feet. "It's disrupting its form!" I cranked up the device to its maximum setting. The creature writhed and shrieked, its form destabilizing. "Now, Danny!" Chris's voice urged. "Shut it down!" I lunged for the control panel, slamming my hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The machine's hum rose to a deafening crescendo, then abruptly cut off. A shockwave of energy exploded outward, and everything went white. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the basement. The machine was silent, its lights dark. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were slowly getting to their feet, and there, in the center of the room, was Chris. The real Chris, solid and whole. "Danny," he said weakly, "you did it." As we embraced, tears streaming down our faces, I knew it was over. The rifts in reality were closing, the interdimensional invasion thwarted. In the days that followed, Evergreen Valley slowly returned to normal. The government covered up the incident, attributing the strange events to mass hysteria caused by a gas leak. Only a handful of us knew the truth. Chris struggled to adapt to being back, his memories of the other dimension fading like a dream. Dr. Harris retired from teaching, dedicating himself to studying the data we'd gathered. Agent Chen disappeared, but I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. As for me, I was changed forever. I knew now that reality was far stranger and more fragile than I'd ever imagined. But I also knew the power of friendship, courage, and determination in the face of cosmic horrors. Evergreen Valley was safe for now. But as I looked up at the stars at night, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets and dangers lurked in the vast, unknown reaches of the multiverse. The old Ford pickup truck groaned as it navigated the winding dirt road, its weathered frame protesting against each bump and turn. Layla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. The dense forest of the Cascade Mountains in western Oregon pressed in on both sides, the towering Douglas firs and western red cedars creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow them whole. "Are you absolutely sure this is the right way?" Meg asked from the passenger seat, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She pushed her glasses up her nose and squinted at the crumpled map spread across her lap. "I swear it wasn't this remote last time." Layla nodded, though a seed of doubt had taken root in her mind. "This is where the GPS led us before it lost signal. The Whispering Woods campground should be just ahead. You know how these back roads can be. They probably haven't updated the maps in years." From the back seat, Osmond leaned forward, his usually stoic face betraying a hint of concern. "I don't remember the trail being this overgrown. How long has it been since we were last here? 5 years?" 6, Alexa corrected, not looking up from her phone as she futilely searched for a signal. "We haven't been back since that crazy trip after high school graduation. Remember? It was right after they shut down the old Blackwater lumber operation nearby." A low whine emanated from the very back of the truck, where Toby, Osmond's loyal golden retriever, was secured in his travel crate. Osmond reached back to scratch the dog's ears through the bars. "Easy, boy. We're almost there." As if on cue, the trees began to thin and a small clearing emerged from the green twilight of the forest. Layla let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and eased the truck to a stop. A worn wooden sign, half hidden by encroaching vegetation, read, "Whispering Woods Campground, Willamette National Forest." The group piled out of the vehicle, stretching their legs and taking in their surroundings. The clearing was smaller than Layla remembered, barely large enough for their truck and the 2 tents they'd brought. The trees that encircled them seemed impossibly tall, their uppermost branches disappearing into the darkening sky. "It's different," Meg said softly, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. "More wild. Untamed." Alexa snorted, finally pocketing her useless phone. "What did you expect? The Forest Service has been underfunded for years. They probably haven't maintained this place since we were last here. Come on, let's get set up before it gets too dark." As they began unloading their gear, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier here, almost oppressive. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, the scurrying of small animals, seemed muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Osmond must have sensed her unease. He approached her as she was struggling with one of the tent poles, his face a mask of concern. "Everything okay, Layla? You seem tense?" She forced a smile, not wanting to dampen the mood of their long-awaited reunion trip. "I'm fine. Just tired from the drive, I guess. And maybe a little spooked by how different everything looks." Osmond nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer. If you say so. But remember, we're all in this together. If anything's bothering you, you can talk to us. Layla appreciated his concern, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her. It was just a feeling, a vague sense of wrongness that she couldn't shake. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on getting their campsite set up. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, they finally had both tents erected and a small fire crackling in the pit. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across the clearing, and for a moment Layla could almost convince herself that this was just like old times. 4 friends on an adventure, with nothing to worry about but ghost stories and running out of marshmallows. But as they gathered around the fire, passing around a bag of chips and recounting old memories, Layla couldn't help but notice how the shadows at the edge of their campsite seemed to deepen and shift. More than once, she caught herself staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, certain she had seen something move. The crackling of the campfire filled the air as the group huddled closer, their laughter echoing through the clearing. Layla found herself relaxing slightly, the familiar banter of her friends pushing away the unease that had been gnawing at her since their arrival. Remember that time Osmond got his foot stuck in that old tree root? Alexa snickered, pointing her marshmallow stick accusingly at their friend. He screamed like a little girl. Osmond rolled his eyes, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Hey, I thought it was a snake. Anyone would have screamed. A snake? Meg teased, nudging him with her elbow. In Oregon? You're lucky we didn't leave you behind for being so... Her words were cut short by a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything Layla had ever heard before. Not quite wolf, not quite human, but something in between that sent shivers down her spine. Toby, who had been contentedly gnawing on a stick at Osmond's feet, suddenly stood up, his hackles raised. He let out a low growl, staring intently into the darkness beyond their camp. What was that? Alexa whispered, her usual bravado faltering for the first time since they'd arrived. Osmond stood up slowly, one hand resting reassuringly on Toby's head. Probably just a coyote or something, nothing to worry about. But as he spoke, the howl came again, closer this time. And in the flickering firelight, Layla could have sworn she saw a pair of eyes watching them from the shadows. That's no coyote, Meg said, her voice trembling. It sounds... bigger. Layla tried to keep her voice steady as she spoke. Maybe it's a wolf. I heard they were reintroducing them to some parts of Oregon. Not in this part of the state, Osmond replied, his brow furrowed. And definitely not this close to a campground. Something's not right. As if to punctuate his words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the fire to flicker wildly. For a moment, the shadows seemed to come alive, dancing and reaching towards them with spectral fingers. Okay, this is getting creepy, Alexa said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. I'm going to go grab my flashlight from the tent. We should probably make sure everything's secured for the night. As Alexa made her way to the tent, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the tree line, trying to pierce the darkness beyond their small circle of light. That's when she noticed something odd. Guys, she said slowly, does anyone else see that? She pointed to a spot between 2 massive Douglas firs. There, barely visible in the gloom, was what looked like a crude symbol carved into the bark. It was hard to make out in the flickering firelight, but it seemed to be a circle with a jagged line running through it. Osmond squinted in the direction she was pointing. I don't see anything. Are you sure? He was interrupted by a scream from the direction of the tents. It was Alexa's voice, high and terrified. Oh my God, guys, come here. You need to see this. They rushed over to find Alexa standing in front of her open backpack, her face pale in the beam of her flashlight. The contents of her bag were strewn about, as if something had been rummaging through it. I didn't do this, she said, her voice shaking. And look. She pointed her flashlight at the side of the tent. There, scratched into the fabric, was the same symbol Layla had seen on the tree, a circle with a jagged line through it. "What the hell is going on?" Osmond muttered, his usual calm demeanor cracking. Before anyone could respond, another howl echoed through the forest, closer than ever. Toby barked in response, straining against Osmond's grip on his collar. "We need to get out of here," Meg said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But as they turned towards the truck, they realized with growing horror that their escape might not be so simple. In the dirt next to the vehicle were a set of massive, oddly shaped footprints. They led from the forest, circled the truck once, and then disappeared back into the woods. Those weren't there when we arrived," Layla said, her heart pounding in her chest. The group stood frozen, the weight of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. They were miles from civilization, with no cell service, and something unknown was out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. As another gust of wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it what sounded like whispered words in an unknown language, Layla realized that their reunion trip had taken a turn into territory far more dangerous and mysterious than any of them could have imagined. The Whispering Woods were living up to their name, and the night was far from over. The group huddled close together near their truck, the once comforting glow of their campfire now seeming woefully inadequate against the pressing darkness of the forest. Layla's mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange events unfolding around them. "We need to think this through logically," Osmond said, his voice low and steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "There has to be a rational explanation for all of this." Meg let out a nervous laugh. "Rational? Osmond, there are giant footprints circling our truck and weird symbols carved into our tent. What part of that is rational?" "It could be a prank," Alexa suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe some local kids heard we were camping here and decided to scare us." Layla shook her head. "In the middle of nowhere? And how would they know we were here? We didn't tell anyone about this trip except our families." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campsite, causing everyone to jump. Toby let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Whatever it is, it's still out there," Layla whispered. Osmond took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "Okay, let's think about this. The howl we heard, it could have been a wolf, right? Maybe one that's adapted to live in this area." "But you said there weren't wolves in this part of Oregon," Meg countered. "Official reports might not be up to date," Osmond reasoned. "Animals migrate, adapt. It's possible a wolf pack has moved into the area recently." As they discussed the possibilities, Layla's eyes were drawn to the edge of the firelight. For a moment she thought she saw something move, a large, shadowy figure that seemed to shift and change shape as it moved between the trees. She blinked, and it was gone. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The others turned to look, but the forest beyond their camp was still and silent. "See what?" Alexa asked, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness but revealing nothing unusual. Layla hesitated. "I thought I saw something, like a large animal, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to describe the strange, shifting quality of the figure she'd glimpsed. Meg's eyes widened. "You don't think it could be, one of those creatures from the old stories, do you? The ones that can change between human and animal?" "A werewolf?" Alexa scoffed, but there was a tremor in her voice. "Come on, Meg, those are just legends." "Every legend has a kernel of truth," Osmond mused, his academic interest seemingly overriding his fear for a moment. "Many cultures have stories of shapeshifters or people who can take on animal forms. In the Pacific Northwest, there are Native American legends of skinwalkers and other supernatural beings." "This isn't helping, Osmond," Layla said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "We need to figure out what to do. Should we try to leave?" Before anyone could respond, another howl echoed through the forest. This time it was answered by several others, coming from different directions. The group instinctively drew closer together. "It sounds like there's more than one," Meg whispered, her face pale in the firelight. "Pack animals," Osmond nodded. "That's consistent with wolf behavior. But something about those howls, they don't sound quite right." Layla knew what he meant. The howls were deeper, more guttural than any wolf she'd heard before. And there was something else, an almost human quality to them that sent shivers down her spine. "Look!" Alexa suddenly exclaimed, pointing towards the tree line. There, just visible in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy, was a set of eyes reflecting the light. They were too high off the ground to belong to a normal wolf, and as they watched, the eyes blinked and seemed to shift position, as if the creature they belonged to was standing up on its hind legs. For a long moment, the group stood frozen, staring at those eerie eyes. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving behind only the rustling of leaves and another distant howl. "We need to get out of here," Layla said, her voice shaking. "Now." But as they turned towards the truck, they realized their situation had gotten even more dire. The vehicle's tires were flat, long gashes visible in the rubber. "No, no, no," Alexa muttered, running her hands through her hair. "This can't be happening." Osmond knelt down to examine the damage. "These cuts, they look like claw marks. But they're huge, and the pattern is all wrong for any animal I know." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Whatever was out there in the forest, it was intelligent enough to disable their only means of escape. And it was unlike anything they had encountered before. As the group huddled together, trying to come up with a plan, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. The Whispering Woods had turned into a trap, and they were the prey. But the question remained, what exactly was hunting them? And more importantly, how were they going to survive the night? The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of rustling leaves and what seemed like distant, inhuman laughter. The long night in the Whispering Woods was far from over. The realization that they were trapped in the clearing with flat tires and unknown dangers lurking in the surrounding forest hit the group hard. Layla could see the panic rising in her friend's eyes, and she knew she had to act fast to keep everyone calm. "Okay, we need to think this through," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We can't leave right now, so we need to focus on staying safe until morning." Osmond nodded, visibly collecting himself. "You're right. We should secure the campsite as best we can. There's some emergency supplies in the truck flares, a first aid kit, maybe even a spare tire." "A spare tire won't help much if whatever is out there decides to slash it too," Alexa muttered. But she moved to help Osmond check the truck's supplies. Meg, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Guys, I just remembered something. When we were setting up camp earlier, I saw an old trail marker. I think there might be a ranger station a few miles from here." This news brought a glimmer of hope to the group. Layla turned to Meg. "Are you sure? Do you remember which direction?" Meg nodded hesitantly. "I think so. It was to the east, I'm pretty sure, but—" She trailed off, glancing nervously at the dark forest. "But we'd have to go through the woods," Layla finished for her. The idea of venturing into the forest where whatever had been stalking them was hiding sent a chill down her spine. "We can't split up," Osmond said firmly. "That's the worst thing we could do in this situation. If we go, we all go together." As they debated their options, a new sound cut through the night. A long, low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was followed by what sounded like words in a language none of them recognized, carried on the wind. Toby whimpered and pressed closer to Osmond's legs. Even the loyal dog seemed unnerved by the strange occurrences. "Did you hear that?" Alexa whispered, her eyes wide. "It sounded like it was talking." Layla shook her head, trying to clear it. "It's just the wind playing tricks on us. We're all scared and our minds are making things up." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. The moaning sound came again, louder this time, and with it came a sudden drop in temperature. Layla could see her breath misting in the air, despite it being a warm summer night just moments ago. "This isn't natural," Meg said, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." The urgency in Meg's voice seemed to galvanize the group. They quickly gathered what supplies they could from the truck flashlights, water bottles, energy bars, and a small hatchet that Osmond had brought for chopping firewood. As they prepared to leave, Layla noticed something that made her blood run cold. The strange symbol they had seen earlier, the circle with the jagged line, was now scratched into the dirt near their campfire. It hadn't been there minutes ago, she was sure of it. "Guys," she said, pointing to the symbol, "look." The others gathered around, staring at the freshly drawn symbol with a mixture of fear and confusion. "How—" Alexa started, but she was cut off by another howl, closer than ever before. "We need to go. Now," Osmond said, his voice tight with tension. With one last look at their abandoned campsite, the group set off into the dark forest, Meg leading the way towards where she remembered seeing the trail marker. Layla brought up the rear, constantly glancing behind them, unable to shake the feeling that they were being followed. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to press in around them, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the beam of their flashlights. The strange moaning sound continued, rising and falling like some bizarre, otherworldly song. Suddenly, Toby stopped in his tracks, his hackles raised. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he stared intently into the darkness ahead. "What is it, boy?" Osmond whispered, straining to see what had caught the dog's attention. For a moment, all was still. Then, in a flash of movement, something large darted between the trees ahead of them. In the brief moment it was visible, Layla caught a glimpse of matted fur, unnaturally long limbs, and gleaming eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. A collective gasp went up from the group. Whatever they had just seen, it was clear that it was no ordinary forest animal. "Run!" Layla shouted, and without hesitation, the group broke into a sprint. They crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at their faces as they ran. Behind them, they could hear the sound of pursuit, heavy footfalls, and the snapping of twigs. The howling grew louder, joined by others surrounding them on all sides. As they ran, Layla's mind raced. What were these creatures? Why were they being hunted? And most importantly, how were they going to survive this night in the Whispering Woods? The forest around them seemed alive with malevolent energy, the very trees appearing to shift and move in the corners of their vision. The line between reality and nightmare was blurring, and Layla realized that their ordeal in the Whispering Woods was far from over. The group crashed through the underbrush, their lungs burning as they gasped for air. The sounds of pursuit were all around them, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, and the occasional otherworldly howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This way!" Meg shouted, veering suddenly to the left. The others followed without question, too focused on escape to worry about direction. Suddenly Layla's foot caught on an exposed root, sending her tumbling to the forest floor. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. "Layla!" Osmond called out, doubling back to help her up. "Are you okay?" She gritted her teeth against the pain. "I think I've twisted my ankle, but we can't stop. They're still coming." As if in response to her words, a chilling howl echoed through the trees closer than ever. Osmond made a quick decision. "Alexa, Meg, keep going. Follow the trail to the ranger station. We'll catch up." Alexa hesitated for a moment, but another howl spurred her into action. She grabbed Meg's hand, and they disappeared into the darkness ahead. Osmond helped Layla to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved as quickly as they could through the forest. Toby stayed close, his ears pricked for any sign of danger. As they stumbled along, Layla noticed something strange. The forest around them had changed. The trees seemed older, more gnarled, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. Strange symbols, similar to the one they'd seen at the campsite, were carved into the bark of several trees. "Osmond," she whispered, "look at the trees. Have you ever seen anything like this?" He shook his head, his face pale in the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. "Never. It's like we've wandered into a different part of the forest entirely." A twig snapped behind them, and they froze. Slowly, they turned to look back the way they had come. There, half hidden in the shadows, stood a figure. It was tall, far taller than any man, with a body that seemed to shift and change as they watched. One moment it appeared almost human, the next more like a wolf standing on its hind legs. But its eyes remained constant, glowing with an eerie, intelligent light. Toby let out a low growl, positioning himself between the creature and his human companions. "Don't move," Osmond breathed, his grip on Layla's arm tightening. For what felt like an eternity, they stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. Then, to their amazement, it spoke. The words were unlike any language Layla had ever heard, guttural and ancient-sounding. Yet somehow she felt she could almost understand them, as if the meaning was hovering just at the edge of her comprehension. Suddenly, Toby barked sharply, breaking the spell. The creature's form seemed to ripple, and in the blink of an eye, it had vanished into the shadows. What was that?" Layla gasped, her heart pounding. Osmond shook his head, at a loss for words. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving. Can you walk?" Layla tested her ankle. The pain was still there, but manageable. "I think so. But Osmond, that thing, it spoke, and I almost understood it. How is that possible?" Before he could respond, a new sound reached their ears. It was faint, but unmistakable. Voices. Human voices. "Hello? Is someone there?" a man's voice called out. "We heard shouting." Relief flooded through Layla. "Over here," she called back. "We need help." Moments later, the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, and two figures emerged from the trees. They were dressed in the uniform of forest rangers. "Are you folks all right?" the first ranger asked, taking in their disheveled appearance. "We've been getting reports of strange noises in this area all night." As Osmond quickly explained their situation, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rangers seemed too calm, given the circumstances. And was it her imagination, or did their eyes seem to glint strangely in the flashlight beam? "Don't worry," the second ranger said, his voice oddly soothing. "You're safe now. We'll take you somewhere secure." As they followed the rangers through the forest, Layla's sense of unease grew. The trees around them were changing again, becoming even more twisted and ancient-looking. And carved into nearly every trunk was that same strange symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it. She glanced at Osmond and saw her own confusion and fear mirrored in his eyys. What had they stumbled into? And more importantly, were these rangers really here to help them, or were they walking into an even greater danger? The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked deeper into the heart of the whispering woods, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive with each step. Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led not to safety, but to the very center of the mystery that had ensnared them. As they approached a clearing ahead, Layla saw a structure taking shape in the gloom, an old weathered cabin that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The rangers led them towards it with purposeful strides. "Welcome," the first ranger said, turning to them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "to the true heart of the Whispering Woods." The rangers led Layla, Osmond, and Toby towards the old cabin. With each step, Layla's sense of unease grew. There was something off about the way the rangers moved. Their movements were more fluid and graceful than seemed natural. As they reached the cabin's door, the first ranger paused and looked at them with gleaming eyes. "Before we enter, you should know that what you're about to see may challenge everything you believe about this world." Osmond tightened his grip on Layla's arm. "What do you mean? Who are you really?" The second ranger smiled, and in the dim light, Layla could have sworn she saw his teeth elongate into sharp points. We are the guardians of this forest, and of secrets far older than your civilization." Before either Layla or Osmond could respond, the cabin door swung open of its own accord. A warm golden light spilled out, along with the scent of herbs and old wood. Despite her fear, Layla felt an inexplicable pull towards the interior. They stepped inside, and Layla gasped. The cabin's interior was far larger than its exterior suggested, impossibly so. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes. Strange artifacts and symbols decorated every surface, and in the center of the room stood a large circular table covered in intricate carvings. "Welcome," a voice said, and they turned to see an elderly man emerging from a back room. His eyes held the same eerie glow as the Rangers. "I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" Layla managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled kindly. "I have many names, but you can call me Keeper. I watch over this forest and the secrets it holds." Osmond stepped forward, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "What secrets? What's going on here?" The Keeper gestured towards the table. "Come, sit. Your friends will join us soon. There's much to explain." As if on cue, the cabin door burst open again, and Alexa and Meg stumbled in, looking disheveled and terrified. Behind them came two more ranger-like figures. "Layla! Osmond!" Meg cried out in relief. "You're okay!" As the group reunited, the Keeper waited patiently. Once they had all settled around the table, he began to speak. "The Whispering Woods are more than just a forest. They are a nexus point, a place where the veil between worlds grows thin. The creatures you encountered, the ones you might call werewolves, are but one of many beings that inhabit this liminal space." Alexa scoffed, though her voice trembled. "Werewolves? Nexus points? This is insane." The Keeper's eyes flashed. "Is it? You've seen things tonight that defy explanation. The world is far stranger and more wonderful than you've been led to believe." He waved his hand over the table, and suddenly the carvings began to move and shift, forming images that played out like a movie. They saw glimpses of ancient rituals, of creatures half man and half beast, of doors opening between worlds. "For centuries my order has protected this place," the Keeper continued. "We maintain the balance between worlds and ensure that the secrets of the Whispering Woods do not fall into the wrong hands." Layla leaned forward, mesmerized by the images. "But why us? Why were we chased?" The Keeper's expression grew serious. "Because you, Layla, are special. You carry the blood of the ancient guardians. Your presence here has awakened old magics and old dangers." Layla's mind reeled. "What? But that's impossible. I'm just me." "The symbol you saw," the Keeper said, tracing the circle with the jagged line in the air, where it glowed for a moment before fading. "It's the mark of the Guardians. You were drawn here because it's time for you to take your place among us." Osmond stood up abruptly. "This is crazy. Layla, we need to leave. Now!" But as he spoke, a howl pierced the night outside. The Keeper's expression grew grim. "I'm afraid it's too late for that. The hunt has begun." "The hunt?" Meg asked, her voice quavering. "An ancient rite," one of the Ranger Guardians explained. "When the old magics awaken, it draws beings from many worlds. Some come to protect, others to destroy or conquer." The Keeper turned to Layla. "You have a choice to make, child. Embrace your heritage and help us protect this place, or try to run. But know that if you run, the hunt will never stop pursuing you." Layla looked at her friends, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. She thought of the strange connection she had felt to the forest, the way she had almost understood the creature's language. Could it all be true? Before she could respond, the cabin shook with a tremendous impact. Snarls and howls filled the air outside, along with other more alien sounds. "They're here," the Keeper said grimly. "The choice is yours, Layla, but you must decide quickly." Layla stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I don't fully understand what's happening, but I know we can't run forever. If I can help, I will." The keeper nodded approvingly and handed her an amulet, a silver disc emblazoned with the guardian's symbol. "Then let the trial of the hunt begin. Your friends will be safe here, but you must face this challenge alone." Osmond grabbed Layla's arm. "You can't be serious. This is madness." Layla looked at him, then at Meg and Alexa. "I have to do this. Somehow I know it's right." She turned to the keeper. "What do I need to do?" "Step outside and face the hunt," the keeper said. "Let your instincts guide you. Remember, you are of two worlds now. That is your strength." With a deep breath, Layla moved towards the door. As she gripped the handle, she looked back at her friends one last time. "I'll come back, I promise." Then she stepped out into the night, into a world of magic and danger she was only beginning to understand. The moment Layla stepped outside, the world seemed to shift around her. The forest was alive with movement and sound, shadows darting between trees and eerie lights flickering in the distance. The amulet around her neck pulsed with warmth, and she felt a surge of energy course through her body. A chorus of howls rose from the darkness, and Layla saw them, the wolf-like creatures that had been chasing them. But now, seeing them with her awakened senses, she realized they were far more than simple animals. Their forms shifted and changed, sometimes appearing almost human, other times fully bestial. One of the creatures, larger than the rest, stepped forward. When it spoke, Layla was shocked to find she could understand its guttural language. "Child of two worlds," it growled. "You do not belong here. This is not your hunt." Layla stood her ground, drawing strength from the amulet and some deep, hidden part of herself. "I may not have known about this world until today, but I am here now. I choose to stand with the Guardians." The creature snarled, baring sharp teeth. "Then prove your worth. Survive the hunt, and we will acknowledge your claim. Fail, and your blood will feed the forest." Without warning, the creature lunged at her. Layla's body moved on instinct, dodging with a speed and grace she never knew she possessed. As she moved, the forest seemed to respond to her, branches reaching out to block her pursuers, roots rising to trip them. Layla ran deeper into the woods, the pack of hunters close behind. She could feel the magic of the forest pulsing around her, and somehow she knew she could tap into it. Focusing on that energy, she managed to blur her form, making it harder for the hunters to track her. As she ran, Layla began to understand the true nature of the trial. It wasn't just about escaping the hunters, it was about proving her connection to the forest, her ability to navigate between worlds. She came to a clearing where the veil between worlds seemed particularly thin. Shimmering portals flickered in and out of existence, offering glimpses of strange, alien landscapes. The hunters were closing in, but Layla saw her opportunity. With a deep breath, she focused on the energy of the amulet and her own awakening power. She leaped through one of the portals just as it was about to close. Layla found herself in a twisted version of the forest, where the trees were made of crystal and the sky burned with ethereal fire. She could hear the hunters crashing through the portal behind her, their howls distorted in this strange realm. For what felt like hours, Layla navigated through a series of these otherworldly domains, always staying one step ahead of the hunt. She crossed fields of living shadows, swam through rivers of liquid starlight, and climbed mountains that defied the laws of physics. With each world she traversed, Layla felt her connection to the magic growing stronger. She learned to manipulate the energy around her, using it to boost her speed, create illusions, and even briefly take on aspects of the creature she encountered. Finally, exhausted but exhilarated, Layla found a portal that led back to her own world. She emerged into the whispering woods, near the cabin where her friends waited. The hunters burst out behind her, but now they kept their distance, watching her with a mixture of wariness and respect. The leader of the pack approached, its form stabilizing into something between wolf and man. "You have survived the hunt," it said. its voice grudgingly respectful. "You have proven your connection to the worlds beyond. We acknowledge your right to stand with the Guardians." Layla stood tall, feeling the power of the forest thrumming through her veins. "Thank you," she said. "I hope we can work together to protect this place." The creature nodded once, then melted back into the shadows with its pack. As they disappeared, Layla heard the keeper's voice behind her. "Well done, young guardian," he said, smiling proudly. "You have passed the trial and taken the first step on a grand journey." Layla turned to see not only the keeper but her friends as well, watching her with awe and confusion. Osmond stepped forward. "Layla, what happened out there? You were gone for hours and we saw impossible things." Layla smiled tiredly. "It's a long story, Osmond, one I'm still trying to understand myself." The keeper placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come, all of you. It's time we had a proper talk about the future and the role you each have to play in it." As they walked back to the cabin, Layla looked at her friends. "I know this is all insane and scary," she said, "but I promise I'll explain everything as best I can. We're in this together, whatever happens next." Meg, Alexa, and Osmond exchanged glances, then nodded. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team. The next few days were a whirlwind of revelations and adjustments. The keeper and his fellow guardians explained the true nature of the Whispering Woods and the vital role it played in maintaining the balance between worlds. Layla threw herself into learning about her newfound abilities and responsibilities. She discovered that her guardian heritage gave her a natural affinity for magic, allowing her to tap into the forest's energy and even communicate with some of its otherworldly inhabitants. Her friends, though initially overwhelmed, soon found their own ways to contribute. Osmond's scientific mind proved invaluable in understanding the complex interactions between different realms. Meg's artistic talents allowed her to document and illustrate the various creatures and phenomena they encountered. Alexa's adventurous spirit and quick thinking made her an excellent scout and strategist. Even Toby had a role to play. The loyal dog seemed to have developed a sixth sense for detecting otherworldly presences, becoming an early warning system for the team. As the days passed, the group faced numerous challenges. They helped the Guardians seal breaches between worlds, negotiated treaties with some of the more amenable otherworldly beings, and fended off those who sought to exploit the forest's power. One morning, about a week after their arrival, the keeper called them all together. "You've done remarkably well," he said, his eyes twinkling with pride. "But now you face a choice. You can return to your old lives with the knowledge that this world exists but no obligation to it. Or you can join us as full guardians of the Whispering Woods." The friends exchanged glances. It was Layla who spoke first. "I don't think I could go back to a normal life now, knowing what I know," she said. "I want to stay and continue learning, to protect this place and all the wonders it contains." Osmond nodded. "I agree. There's so much here to discover, so many scientific principles to unravel. I want to be part of that." "Count me in," Alexa grinned. "This is the greatest adventure I could have ever imagined." Meg hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Someone needs to document all of this. I'll stay too." The keeper beamed at them. "I had hoped you would say that. Very well, let us make it official." He led them to a sacred grove deep in the heart of the forest. There, under the light of a full moon, they took their oaths as guardians of the Whispering Woods. As Layla recited the ancient words, she felt the forest's magic surge through her. She saw flashes of the challenges that lay ahead, dark forces that would try to breach the boundaries between worlds, difficult choices that would test her resolve, wonders beyond imagination waiting to be discovered. But she also saw the strength of the bonds she had forged, with her friends, with the forest, and with the vast, intricate web of reality they now helped to protect. Whatever came, they would face it together. As the ceremony concluded, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Layla looked at her friends, now fellow guardians, and smiled. Their ordinary camping trip had led them on an extraordinary journey.